everyone. Awesome. So we're at time, so let's get started. I have popped in MTTP in there. Like, Ruben, was there anything particularly that you wanted to call out, or anything we need to change or improve to help with MTTP? Oh, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I think on days when we don't have incidents, we easily manage to do 5 deployments a day, 4 or 5 usually. So yeah, I don't think we need to do anything to further improve that.
Great. It might be worth having a chat with Myra about whether the schedule, well, we'll see more as we get the changes coming through on the new staging, on Staging Canary. The tests will start running soon, but it might be worth, if we are kind of consistently getting 4 or 5 deployments a day, possibly the timing, the spacing of those throughout the day will impact MTTP. Because theoretically, if we're doing 5 a day, then MTTP should be like just over 5 hours. So at some point we've not got those quite staggered evenly throughout the 24 hours. So it could just be worth spending time with Myra and review that.
Okay. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, great stuff. And then I've added in the announcements, read only, but just a heads up that we are going to be quite light on people, particularly next week, with Henry and Skalbeck both out. And then Robert is out as well. I also saw, I don't think I've seen anyone pop it in routes yet, but I saw in one of the Slack channels that the 11th is also a US public holiday. So I don't know if that means that Robert may be also out additionally on the 11th. So I'll check in there, but just as a kind of a heads up on visibility stuff, that I'm expecting that we won't be making too much progress in the next few weeks, and that's fine. But also, if you're needing help from other people, also factor that into your times. Great. So on the discussion point, I was chatting with Graham earlier on today, and we were talking about Kate's workloads. And I know this has come up in kind of lots of different contexts and conversations around like Kate's workloads and release tools, and how so the sort of 3 pieces that on all of our plans is like, how does Kate's workload deploy code and config? How does release tools do the same? And then actually our kind of longer term goal is how do we work with the GitLab.com product, GitLab product features to actually do the same? So I feel like a lot of the conversations recently have been sort of circling around the bulk of this. And perhaps what certainly I feel I'm missing a bit of is a really good understanding of like how each of these pieces is working and what's the pros and cons of those. I suspect we haven't got anyone in the team, maybe Alessio, you could be our exception here, of anyone who's really got a good understanding of all those pieces. So I was going to suggest, but I'm very open to hearing what people think in terms of might be a better sort of way of doing this. But what I was thinking of doing was starting to put together some issues that, like individual issues, because it's such a huge topic, but start to build up a picture of like, this is specifically how like deployer is doing things. This is why it does it in that way. This is why we're still using it. And this is what Kate's workload's doing. And this is how it's built up. And this is why release tools, and try and get to a stage where everyone in the team has like a good enough understanding of the pieces that we can then have a good discussion as a team, like do it all async, but just in terms of like, we're working on the single pipeline at the moment, but how do we actually make that single pipeline fulfill all of these needs? Like, what would that actually end up looking like? So just in kind of from a gathering thoughts today, like, does that sound like a good approach to try and start capturing this, like to actually just have some issues to get the foundation pieces in place?
I have to say I like this idea, because I think a lot of what we right now have is historically grown. And although there were a lot of discussions and also documentation on why we did things like we are doing them, I think it's hard to get the big picture of that, especially if you're not dealing with this from the beginning. So maybe if we get something like the big picture and the big reasons of what we want to achieve, right? What is important to us, because this has so many aspects, but we need to pick some important things. And then contrast it with what we have right now. This would be very helpful to identify where we can improve most, right? And this is really hard to get this overview, like which way do we want to be safe to not mix configuration changes with deployments, for instance, and do we need different tooling for that, and all these kind of decisions. If we have a grand overview of what we want to achieve, like what are the important things, like speed of deployments and simplicity of tools and things like that, then maybe we get a better overview of what to work on. At least for me, it would be helpful, yeah.
What sparked this conversation with Amy is I'm slowly, the more I look at the Kate's workloads repo, we're at a point where I'm like, oh my God, like all of these things we have and so much work we've put into it. I actually think we've gotten to a point now where honestly, I kept coming up with ideas to fix things. And then I'm like, actually, we could probably replace this whole thing now with like 2 lines of bash or something, or like there's no need. We introduced like Helm file and Helm and all these things. And now we're like, keep walking backwards. Like what value does this get us now? Because we just see less and less value in all these pieces. But yeah, but at the same time, you know, I know all the Kate's workloads history because I've been working on that repo since dot, but I don't know like deployer or release tools and the value they have. And there's and for Kubernetes specific deployments, there's a lot of off the shelf tools that do a lot of really good things as well, which we may use, we may not, but we certainly need to understand what our requirements are before we can even consider, you know, what do we want to do.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I was a little worried about with this approach, and perhaps we can address as we go through the issues, was are we going to is there documentation that already exists about how some of this stuff works? Like, are we going to end up duplicating, like, for example, on Kate's workloads, is there already some documentation on how that pipeline is working?
The pipeline, no. And in fact, the pipeline is actually the worst and weakest part about that repo. It needs an well, that's what we're talking about, right? Like, yeah, the pipeline is weak. The documentation on it, it's just because it grew organically. Everything did, and it's probably worthwhile. I could pull together some pretty ancient issues where a lot of the decisions were made, and I probably should as part of this exercise, because but yeah, it was literally, it started as literally one step, which was just like one stage with just like 20, well, not 20, like 3 jobs, I think, staging, production and thing. It just literally started with that, and it was just adding piece after piece after piece after piece. And it's actually not even that complicated. The complicated part is the auto deploy, like that. The pipeline looks like this for most of the times, but then the auto deploy pipelines, you know, get invoked multiple times in that repo and look different. And once again, that makes sense. It's a perfectly valid design, but you know, there's also consideration of like, we could do like a pipeline for everything, but this manual tasks, and maybe release tools or deployer is clicking the manual tasks instead. Like maybe that, I don't know. These are all of the things, right? Like we can go back and really have a look at how do we want this to kind of look like, or and you know, does Kate's workloads like triggers the QA jobs and stuff, or it does for the default pipelines, but not for auto deploy pipelines because we do them differently. So this is back to the question of, well, if just deployer is handling everything regardless of source, like if you consider a config change just to deploy through deployer, like it can coordinate QA jobs anyway. So we don't have that split of the 2 pipelines, and maybe, I don't know, like this is, I guess, all of that kind of discussion, right?
There's something that concerns me about the Kate's workload is that if I remember when we started migration, there was this big assumption and very important requirement of dogfooding the charts. So, and if we look at what we are doing, I don't think we're doing a good job in that sense, right? Because we basically are using a randomly old version of the charts, which is not auto-deployed, and we're just bumping the image version. And that's already something that I personally don't like, but this is okay. Can be okay. So, but also on top of that, charts are made of multiple components with several images, and we are not respecting those that are included in the current version of the auto-deploy charts, which means that we may be rolling out something on production and then tag a monthly release with stuff that never reached our production environment. And I just give an example, very simple. CAS is a good example of this, because CAS is bumped in GitLab or GitLab project. He has his own version files, which means that when we tag, and when we tag, I mean we tag the monthly release, we will tag that version there. But there's no connection between that version file and the thing that we are rolling out in production, because it's running on Kubernetes, and so they have to manually bump the image version themselves. So we made release something that we never tested. And another good example of this is another different example of this problem is registry. Registry doesn't even have a version file in GitLab, in the GitLab Rails application, but it has in Omnibus, I think, and obviously because we package it in Omnibus. So it's kind of weird because the development team bumps its own version in Kate's workload because they want to test the thing, but this has no relation, and there's nothing we control over what do we ship every month, because then there is other two version information. One is in the CNG in Helm chart, basically the version that we put in the chart, and the Omnibus version. And to my understanding, maybe they are not interested in this at the moment because the thing they are working on are specific for GitLab.com only, not supposed to be released to customer at the moment. But I hope we go in the same direction where they just add a version file and GitLab repo so that we can just add a single line to release tools and propagate those versions everywhere.
Yeah,
so
there was some discussion around this, and they are interested in this, but it's not high priority. And I think they deal with that manually fine so far, bumping versions in CNG and also in Kubernetes workloads. So they are aware, kind of, but it's not really automated in some way, so we can't trust it.
Yeah, but long term, this is really a problem, right? Because I would like to be able to reduce the number of competing merge requests in Kate's workload. So I think that right now, if we go down this route, we could reach a point where we only have two things that changes. One is auto-deploy, and the other one is configuration changes. Because, for instance, Mailroom is another good example. So we have hard-coded version of Mailroom in Kate's workload, but we should use the auto-deploy version. And we'd just be always the same image, but who will remember to, let's say there is a security vulnerability in Mailroom and we bump a version. We will never remember to just go there in Kate's workload and bump the version manually.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying, and you're right. We need. I think the mental model I consider is, so release tools or something has to coordinate all of these things coming in, right? So whether it's so the version of GitLab, so like the CNG images, like the Helm chart, we don't, but we kind of like we tag Helm charts, but we never use it. Like that what Helm chart we use is off to the side. So all of these things should come in. the good part with the Kate's workload stuff, or Kubernetes as well, is if we peel away all of the craft, and honestly, I mentioned this to Amy, I'm happy to even throw away that repo and start again. But if we peel it all away, the craft, all we need release tools or something to do is just pass the YAML, like pass some values in a YAML file that it needs, like whatever we can determine automatically. And it can just be like, this is the chart version, this is some image versions and what have you. And then it just needs to run Helm, and like, which is like one command, and just away it goes. And but the hard part is like, yeah, like we need to start tracking the chart properly as a auto deploy artifact, and possibly like we see Andrew and Java wanting to move the configuration, like what environment variables are in Ruby or something for Kate's workloads. They're trying to interesting coordinating that into the or what the settings are for load balancers or whatever they need to configure in the Terraform part. They want to put that there. So it's like, if you consider the repo, like if we take apart all of the Kate's workload stuff and like, this is configuration values, and most of it we have to pull out from Google Cloud, which has been created. Like, there's so much craft we have to do. If we just push it somewhere else, but consider that an upstream source, once again, at some kind of deploy time, like, chart is a source, images is a source, configuration management is a source. It's all of these sources that just need to coordinate and come together to, at that pipeline, that single pipeline that's release tools or whatever it is, that gives us, the output. And then we aren't trying to like coordinate the two, because it just becomes another source of data that needs to go into the pipeline. And then everyone's able to watch that one pipeline, whether it's configuration change or whatever, how we coordinate that and timing, we can figure that out. But it's the same pipeline, it's the same QA, it's the same everything. And it's the same, then we got the confidence that the rollback procedure is using the rollback procedure we've already developed and we've tested and we know it works, and we can just comfortable doing that, instead of like, what's the rollback procedure for a config change? We don't really know. Like, it's up to the SRE to figure it out.
Yeah, I do agree. And I was also thinking that, so I don't know, maybe we're going too much into detail. Seems like this is a Kate's workload meeting instead of a delivery team, but just want to point out this. So because we are still in this transition from the single pipeline, Kate's workload has this very unfortunate situation where there's two levels of indirection from release tools, because we do release tools, deployer, and deployer Kate's workload. As soon as we move Kate's workload on the same level of deployer, which means breaking down deployer so that we can extract, for instance, migrations. So we do migrations, then we do fleet, and then we do, in pair with the fleet, we do also the Kate's workload has a part of the fleet. When we have this level of control, it will be easier to provide artifacts downstream. So let's say you want to have your YAML file with versions, release tools will generate the artifacts, store as an artifact, trigger the build and say, hey, get the artifacts that I built. These are extra values you have to put on top of whatever you think is the right value to apply in your Helm charts, because I'm telling you these are the versions. This can be something, because then we can have a sensible artifact storing policy. So we say this type of artifacts we store for 1 month. After 1 month, we don't care. Because the life went on and those version numbers are no longer relevant or things like that. So yeah, this is and in this scenario. No, go ahead, Sil. No, go ahead.
I was going to note, and in that scenario, the version of the Helm chart itself could become something that we pass along as well, right? Because we want to get to that point of, it's not just, oh, I have to bump the Helm chart now. It's constantly being treated as a first-class citizen, and we will break pipelines if something in there goes wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that scenario, also we wanted to mention that we will not have QA as part of the Kate's workload stuff, because there has to be a general QA, which is part of the single pipeline. Then if inside Kate's workload, we need some special, faster, specific QA, then fine, it will be part of his own pipeline. But then the smoke test and this stuff has to be at the release tools level.
So I'm going to open up the issues so we can start doing the foundational stuff, because I think at the moment, like Graham, Alessia, you two are in a unique position to be able to talk proposed solutions because you understand the foundational stuff. But let's try and get everyone onto that foundational level so we can put the proposed solutions. Now, I reckon that whatever we decide is going to be a possibly big project. Like, I'm not expecting that we answer this like this week and set this up for Q4. So I will get things started out, but I'm much more interested that we feel happy with, like, we understand the problem and work to the solution rather than the time at which it takes us to do that. So I'll open up the issues and ping people on those, and then we can start to use those to facilitate more conversations in the team. Sort of related to that, I'm also I'm this week going to try and open up the kind of kickoff discussions for Q4. Now, there's some stuff that maybe is going to be kind of obvious contenders. It may be more clear as we have some of this direction stuff in place. So it feels a little bit like there will be some discussion around that, but I want to get that started sooner rather than later, just because various people are out on PTO. So I'll start getting that discussion moving this week. But again, it's fine if we don't have like a totally clear answer right away on like what should Q4 look like. Awesome. Is there anything else anyone wants to bring up in the discussion? Yep. Okay, I shall stop the recording.